Questions to the Prime Minister. Mr. John Woodcock.
Question 1, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others, and in addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Mr. John Woodcock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. British support in Ukraine is welcome, but combined efforts have been woefully lacking against President Putin's naked aggression. When he leaves office in 70 days, is he content for his place in history to be the Prime Minister whose weakness left Britain mired in years of conflict?
At the end of this Parliament, I believe those on this side of the House can be proud of the fact that we closed the massive black hole in our defence budget left by the party opposite. We can be proud of the fact that we see Voyager airplanes flying out of Bryce Norton. We can be proud of the fact we're building 2 aircraft carriers. We can be proud of the fact we've got the Type 45 destroyers. We can be proud of the fact that submarines are rolling out of its constituency and into the seas of the Atlantic to keep our country safe.
Sir William Cash.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend strongly supported my Gender Equality Act last year to protect women and girls from FGM and similar abominations. My amendment on report to the Serious Crime Bill to protect young girls and women at risk from FGM in this country gained 272 votes. There were many deliberate abstentions, but it was defeated by a 3-line coalition whip. Following a letter from the Minister before the report stage, several matters remained unresolved. I tried to intervene, but I wasn't allowed to do so. Will my right honourable friend write to me and explain how these young girls and women will be fully protected under these guidelines, under this Act and otherwise?
Yes. Well, first of all, can I commend my right honourable friend for his bill and for the campaign that he has waged in favour of that bill and for equality in how we deliver aid and in this vital area. On the specific issue of the piece of legislation he's referring to, my understanding is that we believe that the law as drafted covers the point that he is concerned about. I will, of course, write to him, but let me be absolutely clear. I think the work that we're doing, I think supported right across the House in terms of combating FGM and forced marriage and making sure there are real rights for women in our country and across the world is of vital importance.
Ed Miliband.
Mr. Speaker, the reputation of every member of this House is damaged when we see revelations as we have in the last couple of days. Can I take it from the government's amendment today on second jobs that he's proposing no change to the current system?
Well, first of all, let me start by agreeing very much with the right honourable gentleman that the allegations made against 2 very senior members of this House of Commons are extremely serious. They need to be properly investigated. I believe that both the right honourable gentlemen have done the right thing in terms of referring themselves to the House of Commons Standards Commissioner, in terms of having the whip withdrawn and indeed retiring from this House. I think that's vitally important. I think the most important thing we can do, and I certainly don't rule out further changes, but the most important thing is to make sure we apply the rules. Paid lobbying, banned. Non-declaration of interest, banned. Making sure wrongdoing is investigated and punished. We're not making no change. We've just passed a lobbying act, and we've also passed a recall act so people can sack their MP.
Mr. Ed Miliband.
He doesn't rule out further change, and he has a chance to vote for change tonight. This is what he wrote in 2009. Being a Member of Parliament...
Order! The questions will be heard and the answers will be heard. It's a very simple point which I hope everyone can grasp. Mr. Ed Miliband.
This is what he wrote in 2009, and I quote, "Being a Member of Parliament must be a full-time commitment. The public deserves nothing less." And he went on to say, and I quote, "Double-jobbing MPs won't get a look-in when I'm in charge." What's changed?
I think the difficulty, he says we should look at the specifics. The difficulty with his specific proposal is that it would allow, for instance, someone to be a paid trade union official, but it wouldn't allow someone to run a family business or a family shop. Like many of his proposals, it's not thought through, it's whipped up very quickly. If he thought it was such a good idea, why didn't he put it in place 4 years ago?
Ed Miliband.
Well, let's agree now that we'll rule out anyone being a paid trade union official, a paid director, or a paid consultant. Say yes, and we can restore the reputation of this House.
Let me give him I'll answer very clearly. Very clearly.
Mr. Efford, calm yourself. I fear you're about to explode, man. Get a grip. We must hear the answer from the Prime Minister.
I'm afraid it's not the only problem with his proposal. Let me take another problem with his proposal, with his cap on earnings, and let me say this. Let me take a specific example. Let me take a very specific example. The Honourable... I've got as long as it takes. Let me take a very specific proposal. The Honourable Member for Stoke Central, who is Labour's education spokesman. Now, he earned last year over a 10% cap in terms of being a college lecturer. Now, I happen to think that's a very good thing. He brings to this House some outside experience, and he tops up that experience. I have to say it's a pity it doesn't show up in his education policy, but nonetheless, it is a good thing. But fundamentally, there is a disagreement between the Right Honourable Gentleman and me. I think Parliament is stronger when we have people with different experiences coming to our House. But we must impose strict rules and punish people when they get it wrong.
Definitely make progress. Let's agree to the principle of a cap, and we can consult on the level of the cap. But what's in the motion today is something very specific, which is being a paid director or a paid consultant. Now, I've said from this dispatch box that we will also ban people being a paid trade union official. The offer he made to me, I repeat the offer to him. Let's get it done. Let's agree this to restore the reputation of this House. Yes or no?
The problem is the proposal in front of us allows paid trade union officials, but doesn't allow someone to run a family business. I have to say, Mr. Speaker, the problem with his proposal is not just the nature of the proposal, there's also a problem with the timing of his proposal. He first put it forward 2 years ago. In the previous year, and I've done some work, the person with the highest outside earnings on the Labour side was David Miliband. So he hasn't thought it through, he hasn't worked it out, it's totally inconsistent, it's like almost every other policy he comes up with.
Mr. Ed Miliband.
So he's worried about the precise text. He's worried about the precise text of the motion. I'm very happy, by whatever means we can, a manuscript amendment, to insert paid trade union official, and he has the chance, and all of his honourable and right honourable friends tonight in the lobby. This is a very big test. You can vote for 2 jobs, or you can vote for 1. I'll be voting for 1 job. What will he be voting for?
Where I think the Leader of the Opposition is absolutely right, and he put this in his letter to me this week, is he says this: the British people need to know that when they vote, they're electing someone who will not be swayed by what they may owe to the interests of others. And I think the biggest problem we have on that front is the fact the trade union movement own the Labour Party, lock, stock and barrel.
Can we make an amendment to that?
Let me... So I make an offer to him. No more support for trade unions for the Labour Party, then we've got a deal.
If he wants to talk about party funding, let's talk about a party bought and sold by the hedge funds. a man who appointed a self-declared tax avoider as his treasurer. That's the Conservative Party. Now, he's got one more chance. He talked big in opposition about change. He's going to be judged on the way he votes tonight. He should vote for one job, not two. Last chance, yes or no.
The problem with members of Parliament being swayed by outside interests is best seen in this one example. This Parliament, the first in the history of Britain, has passed an act on lobbying. The Labour Party has been lobbied by the trade unions to get rid of this act. What have they agreed? They've agreed to scrap the Lobbying Act. That is what they've done. They are owned lock, stock and block vote by the trade unions.
Thank you. Give me a chance. Art.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for the welcome. I have harangued the Prime Minister on many previous occasions to do more on nuisance calls. So it is right today that I thank the Government for the announcement made on the subject by DCMS this morning. But of course, vulnerable consumers will still be targeted today and tomorrow by vicious scammers who will pay no heed to this announcement. So can I politely ask that he will do all he can to help me set up a national call blocking scheme to protect these vulnerable consumers, both in his constituency and in mine?
Well, I will certainly look at the specific suggestion that the honourable gentleman makes, but I can announce today we are changing the law to make it easier for companies to be hit with fines of up to £500,000 if they pursue these nuisance calls. I think this will be welcomed up and down the country. I say this as I'm sure parties on all sides of this House will be doing a little bit of late light telephone canvassing and talking to people, but it should never be done nagging people or being a nuisance, which is what can happen, and proper punishments are being brought in today.
Naomi Long.
It costs 40% more to train a teacher in Northern Ireland than it does in England. Does the Prime Minister share my concern that despite commitments to tackle the costs of division in the Stormont House Agreement, other parties have blocked Alliance attempts to desegregate teacher training in a way that would save money? And does it suggest to him, as it does to me, that their commitments to a shared future are not worth the paper they're written on?
Well, what I would say to the Honourable Lady, and I think we're in absolute agreement of this, is what we've got to do is make sure we do break down the barriers between communities, and that's what the Shared Future agenda is all about. And the Stormont House Agreement should make that move faster. We're beginning to see shared campuses for education institutions in Northern Ireland, but now I think we need to see the sorts of things she's talking about, shared approaches on teacher training and other things which can reduce costs and deliver a better service. That's what the agreement should be about.
Andrew Stevenson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last Friday was my 4th Pendle Jobs and Apprenticeship Fair, which was attended by over 30 local companies and over 700 job seekers. Will the Prime Minister congratulate all those who have got jobs or started apprenticeships in Pendle since 2010, where unemployment has fallen by 36% in just the last year, showing our long-term economic plan is working?
Well, I pay tribute to my honourable friend who works tirelessly to support his constituents, and I think these job fairs that many members of Parliament have taken part in and run can do a huge amount in terms of making sure local people can see the opportunities that are being opened up by a successful and growing economy. In Pendle, the claimant count has fallen by 54% since the election, with long-term youth claimant count falling by 50% in the last year alone. That shows, as the OECD themselves said yesterday, Britain has a long-term economic plan, it's working, and we should stick to it.
Mr. Nigel Dodds.
Mr. Speaker, as we have heard, the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition agree that the reputation of politics needs improving. But would he agree that the latest format put forward by the broadcasters for TV election debates won't contribute to that? The broadcasters need to realise that these debates are for the benefit of voters as well as themselves, and that the unfair, irrational and legally implausible exclusion of the people of Northern Ireland from those debates, and particularly the DUP, which has more votes and more seats than some that are included, cannot be justified. So will he agree with us to go back to the broadcasters, demand a rethink on the basis of justice and fairness, and that they come forward with proposals that he and the rest of us can agree to.
No, I have a lot of sympathy with what the honourable gentleman says. I mean, my argument was that you couldn't include one minor party without another minor party, and obviously I was referring specifically to the Greens on that occasion. But now, having decided to include Plaid Cymru and the SNP, there does seem to be a difficulty in not addressing the question of the DUP. Certainly my party stands in every part of the United Kingdom, so I do think that is important, but I'm sure his case will be taken seriously.
Sir Richard Ottaway.
Following the Chancellor's significant commitment to London last week to create 500,000 jobs, to build 100,000 new homes and to invest £10 billion in transport infrastructure, will he agree that this isn't just a long-term economic plan for London, but in stark contrast to other parties who only offer London a mansion tax, will he agree it's a commitment to make London the greatest capital city on earth?
I think my right honourable friend is correct, because this plan for London is about being incredibly ambitious and trying to outpace the growth of New York, adding £6.4 billion to the London economy by 2030. That is what we're trying to do, to see a higher growth rate. We've created something like 500,000 extra jobs since the election in London. We need to keep on with that progress. And as the OECD said yesterday, and I quote, the UK is an actual textbook case, or is fast becoming, of best practice how good labour market and good product market reform can support growth and job creation. My message to you today is well done. Well done so far, but finish the job. You have a long-term economic plan, but you need to stick with it. That is the view of the OECD, and that, I believe, should be backed by everyone in our country.
Rushanara Ali.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, 3 young women from my constituency left their homes, travelled to Turkey.
Order. I think we must start this question again. The honourable lady has an extremely serious question to ask, and it must be heard by members on both sides with courtesy. Rushanara Ali.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, 3 young women from my constituency left their homes, travelled to Turkey, and now thought to have been smuggled into Syria. Their families are devastated. I know the Prime Minister is making every effort to find them and encourage their return. Will he set up an urgent inquiry into these events to ensure families, schools, mosques, youth clubs, internet companies and all agencies are guided on how they can better protect our young people?
No, I think the honourable lady is absolutely right to raise this heartbreaking case, which we also discussed in the House on Monday. Clearly, anyone who saw the parents on the television talking about their children couldn't help be moved by their plight. What I've done is asked the Home Secretary to look urgently with the Transport Secretary at all the protocols we have in place about young people and travelling and what airlines do and what we can do. My understanding is that the police did respond relatively quickly in terms of informing the Turkish authorities, and what the Turkish Deputy Prime Minister has said about a 3-day delay is not accurate, but there are always lessons to learn on this occasion. I suspect the lessons will be not just that we can tighten arrangements on aeroplanes and at our borders, but also we all have a responsibility. Schools, parents, families, communities, universities, colleges all have a responsibility to fight this poisonous radicalisation of young people's minds.
Sir David Mowat.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tomorrow, the Minister for Cities will be in Cheshire to sign our local growth deal, a deal which will deliver 2 bridges for Warrington, infrastructure that has been much needed for the past 30 years. Would the Prime Minister agree with me the fact that we're finally addressing infrastructure needs like this demonstrates a commitment to the North West which was completely lacking in the last government?
No, well, I pay tribute to my honourable friend who's campaigned consistently on this issue, and when I visited his constituency with him, he showed me the difference that is going to make to Warrington South from the announcements being made. As a result of implementing the Cheshire and Warrington local growth deal, we expect to be able to proceed with construction of a high-level bridge crossing the Manchester Ship Canal. A new high-level crossing from the A56 Chester Road will open up a substantial area of land for development immediately south of Warrington town centre. So this is going to provide traffic relief, it's going to provide resilience, it's also going to provide jobs and homes and livelihoods, and that's what our long-term plan's all about.
Glenda Jackson.
Speaker, Why did the Prime Minister deem it appropriate to outsource his response to one of my concerned constituents to a political correspondence manager housed in number 10 Downing Street, on paper bearing a Conservative Party logo, its contents referring to a Conservative manifesto and a Conservative government's legislation, and concluded in the hope that they, I presume, the Conservative Party, Mr. Speaker, could rely upon my constituents' support for many years to come. No member of this House is permitted to use our parliamentary offices or revenue for political party campaigning. Number 10 Downing Street does not become the property of its incumbent's political party, and so will the Prime Minister apologise not only to my constituent, but to the country for this gross misuse of national property and revenue.
What I say to the Honourable Lady is that if a letter was sent from her to me to be answered, but those letters should always be answered by the Prime Minister to other members of Parliament, and I will look into what happened in that case. Let me put on record how hard the correspondence unit work, because they get thousands of letters, including from members of Parliament, every week of the year. So I will look into that and make sure she gets a proper reply from me. But let me say to all those living in Hampstead and Kilburn, they'll be getting lots of letters from me in the coming weeks.
For Mr. Gummer.
Last week, my right honourable friend launched the franchise competition for rail services in East Anglia, including a demand for state-of-the-art rolling stock. He may be aware that some people in this House want a long review of franchise competitions, leading possibly to a renationalisation of the railways. I wondered if he understood the delays and misery this would cause to commuters and travellers in Ipswich, Norwich, Colchester, up and down the Great Eastern Main Line, if this were ever to happen.
Well, first of all, let me thank my honourable friend for the work that he's done and other MPs in East Anglia have done to press for better rail services. We have a very clear view, which is we want to achieve Ipswich in 60 minutes, Norwich in 90 minutes, and that is what these reforms are all about. I think on this day, because he always makes quite a lot of noise opposite, it is worth saying happy birthday to the Shadow Chancellor. And part of the aim of this, when he has plenty of time after the election, he'll be able to get to see Norwich City in just 90 minutes. I think it's only fair. He gives me a birthday present every week, so I thought I'd give him one today.
Mr. Gavin Shuker.
Extremely grateful, Mr. Speaker. In the United States, senators and congressmen face a cap on their outside earnings of 15%. Why is it appropriate for them but not for us?
Well, I think this issue, if the cap is such a good idea, why aren't we voting on it in the House of Commons tonight? If you want evidence that Labour's policy has been written on the back of a fag packet, that tells you all you need to know. Obviously, with plain paper packaging, we're going to be helping them have more room to write their policies on.
Sir Peter Tapsell.
May I assure my right honourable friend?
Order, Sir Peter. Order. Sir Peter must be properly heard. From start to finish. Sir Peter.
May I assure my right honourable friend that I am not a paid trade union official, but I fear that if people in this House are not allowed a second job, that membership of it will soon be largely confined to the inheritors of substantial fortunes, or to rich spouses, or to obsessive crackpots, or to those who are unemployable anywhere else.
I just want to be clear, the Father of the House does not fit into any one of those categories. But I think he makes an important point. I mean, I think Parliament is stronger because we have people with different experience. When you look around this Parliament, we've actually got practising doctors in this House, we've got practising dentists, we've got people who take part serving our country in Afghanistan or Iraq, and we do have people who run family businesses or have other interests. What you want is a parliament that actually where people can come and share their experience and make some points, instead of just having a whole lot of trade union-sponsored ciphers.
Mr. Phil Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've asked the Prime Minister this question before, and he didn't answer then. How many jobs should an MP have?
What I would say is, I mean, at the moment, I am both the Member of Parliament for West Oxfordshire and I'm the Prime Minister. Now, to be honest, I do constituency work every day, but I would be misleading the House if I said I spent more time on my constituency work than being Prime Minister. And I think that's worthwhile reflecting on.
Sir Tony Baldry.
It's being so successful. I wonder if my right honourable friend, for the convenience of the House, and particularly for members opposite, could set out the details of our long-term economic plan.
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend. The plan is about skills, it's about infrastructure, it's about jobs, it's about cutting taxes, but above all, it's about people's livelihoods. It's about securing jobs and livelihoods for people across our country. And the fact that Labour cannot talk about the economy any week when they come to this House is because we've created 1,000 jobs every day this government has been in office. They're keen to talk about second jobs because they don't want to talk about the jobs revolution in our country. They don't want to talk about the apprenticeships. They don't want to talk about the business creation. They don't want to talk about the OECD and the fact that our economy last year grew faster than any other major economy in the West. They can't talk about the economy because they got nothing to say about it.
Mr. Speaker, is the Prime Minister aware that as a result of a 40% cut in the disabled students' allowance, many disabled students say that they will not be able to, they might have to drop out of the courses they're on? Will he undertake to take an urgent review of that problem? Because obviously I'm sure he doesn't want that to be the case.
Now, I have looked specifically at this issue and had a constituency case connected to this issue, and I will go back and look over it again and perhaps write to the honourable gentleman. But it is important to recognise, with the reform of disability living allowance going into personal independence payment, actually there will be more of the most disabled people getting paid at the higher rate.
Lynn Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know the Prime Minister shares my enthusiastic support for organ donation and shares my joy that there has been a 63% increase in what is the most wonderful gift that anyone can give since the Organ Donation Task Force reported in 2008. Will he take an opportunity?
Order! I apologise for interrupting the honourable gentleman. It is discourteous to interrupt an honourable member in the middle of his or her question. Let's hear what the honourable gentleman has to say. It's a matter of manners.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Prime Minister take an opportunity, should one arise, an early opportunity, to join me in helping raise awareness of this wonderful achievement and to help drive on the creation of ever more and greater success in the future?
Well, I absolutely agree with my honourable friend. I think we have seen a very substantial increase in organ donation, and that's been done without moving to a system of presumed consent, which I know the House discussed and voted on previously, which I was not in favour of. But I am in favour of doing more to lead by example, to make sure the best hospitals are pursuing the best practice, and there has been a remarkable increase. So if there's anything I can do to help with his campaign, I'd be delighted to do so.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Lobbying Act, which the Prime Minister mentioned earlier on, did absolutely nothing to affect those who are lobbying for commercial gain, specifically for commercial gain. Will you now introduce a register of professional lobbyists so we'll all know, not to stop it, but so that we all know what they're up to?
Well, first of all, before I answer his question, can I first of all congratulate him on being appointed as the new chair of the Parliamentary Labour Party, where I hope that in 70 days' time he'll be able to conduct a root and branch inquest into what went wrong. But let me answer his question very specifically. if he supports the Lobbying Act, can he explain why trade unions in Britain have lobbied the Labour Party to get rid of the Act? If we want an example of what's wrong with British politics, it's the massive money that goes from the unions to the Labour Party that buys their candidates, buys their policies, and the only reason their leader's sitting there is a bunch of trade union barons thought he was more left-wing than his brother. That's what's wrong with British politics, and that's what needs fixing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When the Prime Minister wrote to my local newspapers heralding the work done to bring superfast broadband to Somerset, was he aware that, according to the government's own figures, Somerset has 41% coverage at the moment, but BT's monopoly means that it'll be the only organisation which is able to bid for the next phase of connections, which offers very little hope for residents and business people in my area without access to superfast broadband. And what's he going to do about that?
Well, what we're going to do is continue spending record sums on broadband rollout. We've seen across the country he's almost doubled from the 40% that we inherited. There's more to do in the most rural areas, including in her constituency. All local councils now have searchable websites so people can see when they expect broadband to get to their area, and we need to look at creative solutions to make sure we get to the last 5%. It's a very important part of our long-term economic plan, and that can only be secured by a Conservative majority government.
Clive Efford. I welcome the fact that the government has been forced to accept our demands for people to be protected when buying tickets on the secondary ticketing market. If they had listened to us last year, thousands of Rugby World Cup fans and Ashes cricket fans would have been saved from having to pay over the face value for tickets. Why is the government always on the side of people like bankers and tax dodgers and the organised gangs behind ticket touting on the secondary ticketing market and never on the side of ordinary people in the street?
This is something that's happened after 4.5 years of a Conservative Prime Minister that never happened after 13 years of a Labour Prime Minister. But I tell you whose side we're on. We're on the side of working people because we're getting them jobs, we're cutting their taxes, we're helping with childcare, and we sit opposite a party. That's the party of Len McCluskey and the trade unions.
John Leach. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that, hot on the heels of devolving powers on transport and housing, the welcome announcement that Manchester will take control of its £6 billion NHS budget shows the Coalition's commitment to local decision-making for Manchester, in stark contrast to the Labour government that oversaw the closure of Withington Hospital from Whitehall?
Well, I think my honourable friend is absolutely right to say this is an important breakthrough. It's made possible by our reforms. It's going to help bring the NHS and social care together. The Shadow Health Secretary, who presumably knew absolutely nothing about this, doesn't understand that 8 Labour authorities in Greater Manchester have been talking to us and working with us about how to make this a reality. What a contrast. People working together to improve the NHS instead of trying to weaponise it across the dispatch box.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last year, more than 3,000 desperate migrants drowned in the Mediterranean. Several hundred have died this year already trying to reach a place of safety. Many people, in absolute desperation, turn to traffickers to try and escape the crisis in Libya and many other places. They're victims of war, they're victims of oppression. The European Union is closing down Mare Nostrum, which has saved a very large number of lives, and instituting instead something that will only protect Europe's borders, not search and rescue people. Will he go back and ensure that Europe adopts a humanitarian approach of saving these desperate people and supporting these desperate migrants that are trying to survive, that's all, survive in Libya?
I think the honourable gentleman makes a very important point, but I'm afraid the statistics don't necessarily back up the case that he's making. Mare Nostrum was a genuine attempt by the Italians to try and help deal with this problem, but I think I'm right in saying more people died during the operation of that policy than when it was brought to an end. I think there are answers here. We need to make sure we press ahead with the modern slavery bill, which is doing a huge amount, a historic piece of legislation taken through by this government to deal with the problem of people trafficking. And yes, we need to do more to stabilise countries like Libya and other countries on the Mediterranean from which many of the problems are coming. And that only underlines the important work that our development budget does.
Order.